What's up, guys? Welcome to the 11th episode of the Martial Praxis podcast. I'm here with Miles Kessler, who's a very prolific teacher of Aikido. One of the reasons I wanted to have him on is that he does a really incredible job of integrating his practice of Aikido with mindfulness. This is something that I'm really interested in and I think can really enhance the practice. So, thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to kind of pick your brain about some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I'm in a bit of a special situation
Yes.
here. Shall I tell them or you want to
Yeah,
tell
yeah,
them?
absolutely.
All right. I'm American. I'm from Dallas, Texas originally, long time ago. But these days I live in Tel Aviv, Israel. And we're in the sixth day of a war between Israel and Iran. And Israeli jets are over there dropping bombs, and Iran is sending ballistic missiles over here. And we've kind of been at war for the past 19 months with different, with Hamas and Hezbollah. And anyways, I won't go too deep into that. But these ballistic missiles that Iran has is a whole nother story, man. And it's
Yeah.
there's some serious shit. Most of them get shot down, but the 10% that get through the Iron Dome and the interceptors, they land hard and they do some damage.
Wow.
So. So we may get interrupted by an alarm. I get an alert on my phone like this. Here, I'll show it to you. I'll get a little map of, I don't know if you can see it, a little map of all the locations
Oh,
that
wow.
the missiles are coming towards. If that happens, I'm going to have to take off. And yeah, so there you go. So that's the context. Let's talk about martial arts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think this is kind of a good jumping off point, honestly, for one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Because when, in my experience with Aikido, I mainly practice Tamiki Aikido,
Hmm.
but I've had the chance to play with a few other styles. I've done some Aikikai and some Iwamaru. Basically, as I've gotten access to those teachers and those people who kind of come into my life, and I would practice with them. And I'm a part of a lot of Aikido forums online, so I get a lot of
Yeah.
exposure to other stuff, and I really enjoy all the styles that I've had the chance to practice. And my impression reading a lot of the works of O Sensei and just studying Aikido in general is that this is a practice that goes way beyond just martial arts. That it's not meant to just be something that is about. It's not just about being able to win in a fight or what we do on the mats. It goes way beyond that, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Aikido as a practice, is informing the way that you deal with crisis, because I think this is something that martial arts in general does have to offer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Aikido as a practice or as a higher path of practice um, has the potential to go way beyond martial arts for sure. As certainly as much as some of the other martial arts, and probably more than most of them. And it is also a martial art. Now, in the strictly martial arts domain, it doesn't stack up. I mean, it's kind of a mid-distance martial art.
Hmm.
There's up close grappling and there's far away striking. And
Hmm.
Aikido's right there in the middle. In the middle, it's great. It's fantastic. But on the outside and on the inside, it's other martial arts are much stronger in that case. And also Aikido, with the exception of Tomiki, which is the one martial art that implemented a competition. Then
Yeah.
that's your art. But with the exception of Tomiki style Aikido doesn't have any competition. So you certainly get the listen. I was from the Iwama tradition, and I trained in Japan at the founder's dojo. Saito Sensei was my teacher, and he was the one running the dojo, kind of old school, traditional, hardcore dojo. In terms of training, I lived there for 8 years in Japan, and I trained 6 days a week for 8 years. Maybe I missed a day or two occasionally, but I was basically there to practice Aikido, so I was training full on. And it was hardcore training. Every single training, you're getting pushed to the edge. Every single training. Loved it, loved it, loved it. So in that sense, it's as equal as to any other hardcore training.
Yeah.
You can get full on good old fashioned martial arts values benefits and skills developed. It's right up there with all the other martial arts.
Yeah.
In terms of street effectiveness, it has to be applied
Yeah.
in less Aikido-like ways for it to really be, an effective
I
street
think this
martial
is
art.
something also that we often, people who do Aikido feel the need to like uh to sort of present it in this way, but this is true of all
It's a
martial
shame.
arts.
It's a shame. It shouldn't be that way. They shouldn't
Yeah,
have to.
it's really
It,
true of everything, you know. Like, I mean, I teach Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mainly in the
okay.
sport context, right? But
Yeah. Uh-huh.
the reality is that when we're talking about self-defense, so many things change. And it's not that those core skills that you develop by through the practice won't serve you. It's that you have to learn how to parameterize those skills for a different environment and a different situation. So, I
The
think,
the
yeah,
application has to be there. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. And if you think about that, James, it's like, if Brazilian jiu-jitsu, anyways, the roots of it is jiu-jitsu. So it is Japanese way back, so at some
yep,
point before the Brazilians created a whole new thing. But if you think of Japanese martial arts, they really became a martial art, not just a
yes,
martial practice, but a martial art when the Tokugawa shogunate took over, and then from
yes,
there was, I think it was 60 or 70 years of warring states. There was all these clans and fiefdoms, and they all had their armies and their secret styles and their secret schools,
yes,
and they were just killing each other, and they were good at it, I guess. But then when it became when the shogun took over, he imposed peace on
yes,
Japan, the whole country, for the first time in history. And that peace held up for 300 years. Now there was a caste system, so there were the samurai there. So the samurai were still the warrior class, and they all had their schools and their styles and but they couldn't fight each other. They weren't allowed to kill each other. I guess
yeah.
there was some chivalry code where they could do duels and stuff like that. But
But the
basically,
fighting became very minimal compared to that warring states period we have.
they weren't warring with each other. So they took
Yeah,
it to the dojo, and they took their martial practice to an art, and even to even up to a level of a
cultivation.
spiritual practice, because it was infused with Shinto, but more so even with Zen Buddhism.
Yes.
So that's when the martial arts kind of were elevated to a higher path of practice, and
Yeah.
you had a higher ideal that you were training for, not just your daimyo, your lord. You weren't just kind of going to war for your lord and for your clan and for your family, but you were going for a higher path of Buddha. There was
Yeah.
kind of the same with the knights, the chivalry and the knights. At that point, martial arts, it's what's so unique about Japanese martial arts, that it was such a long period of time where they were just doing that. They weren't really going to war.
Yeah.
That it was elevated to a spiritual practice. And O Sensei, the founder of Aikido, came out of the tail end of that.
Yeah.
And he took it. I mean, there's a handful of Japanese throughout history that took their martial art to a higher spiritual path. But O Sensei was one of the, I wouldn't say, was one of the handful of people who were able to do it in modern times.
Yeah.
And it was also right there at the end of World War II. So, taking it to a higher path and taking it to the way of peace, and 'cause after Japan was defeated and
Yeah.
really
And I mean,
suffered
in
the
some
defeat of
ways,
the movement.
it seems like Aikido was like his own reaction to somewhat of a period of war and crisis. Like, that influenced his development of Aikido as being the art of peace.
It was also his react not just war and crisis, but it was his reaction to kind of authoritarian imperialistic militarism, like the expansionism. Japan was
Yeah.
expanding, and it was all patriotism, and he saw how it, like all Japanese at that time, they saw how it kind of took them into ruins, and
Yeah.
he was there doing Aikido, and raised from the ashes is one of the modern martial arts that rose up out of the ashes of post-war Japan. So I'm not sure if that answered your first question. There was something about something. There was another piece in there, but I don't remember what
Well,
it
yeah, I'm
was.
curious for you how the practice of Aikido kind of informs how you deal with with crisis, with things that maybe make other people freak out and anxious, and of course we still probably experience these emotions, but it allows us to have a different kind of reaction when you're trained.
Yeah, when you're in the dojo day in, day out, year in, year out, the old metaphor of a sword, like your martial arts training is like the forging of a sword.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
start with a raw piece of iron, and it gets hammered, it gets thrown into the heat,
Hmm.
and then hammered, so it gets shaped. Pounding, 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 and we do that early on in our training, and then once it's shaped into a nice shape, then it gets sharpened. And then
Yes.
you go through, and that first phase could be 3 to 5 years. Then you got the sharpening phase, which could be another 3 to 5 years. And then at the end of the sharpening phase, there's the polishing, another 3 to 5 years or whatever. So in a way, our martial arts training kind of reflects that. And there's something about being in the dojo year in, year out, is that when we do face, now I should put a caveat on this. When you're in the dojo training year in, year out, taking to your edge. You have your edge, I have my edge. He
Yes.
has his edge, she has her edge, young, old, whatever. When you're training at the edge as a higher path, I'll come back to a higher path in a minute, then you're not only will you be developing technically, martially, physically, but also mentally, emotionally, philosophically, and especially spiritually.
Yes.
In that case, Aikido is a transformational practice, and there is a junction that can be made. I would say this is the same thing for all martial arts. That,
Yeah.
but
Well, I
what
think
the
it's very interesting in the
yeah,
sense that, like, and I like that you mentioned this idea of a higher path because th- there's something that goes on with martial arts where sometimes for some people it allows them to develop mentally and spiritually and philosophically, as you said, and other times you don't see that.
there
That
you go.
it's becomes purely a physical practice, and in some senses that physical power becomes a tool for the ego, becomes ego reinforcing rather than
It
ego effacing.
it's
And I'm
it's the
very
dark.
interested in why, like, how does
Well,
what do
it's
we do to make
okay.
sure this doesn't happen?
So I call it the Darth Vader move. It's
Yeah.
like you get power, but you use it for the purpose of your ego. And
Yeah.
this so there's basically at some point everybody's going to face a junction. And one path can be a power path where you're just
Yeah.
getting better, faster, stronger. And if you're a dick, excuse my French, but if you're a dick at the beginning of your training and you'd go 10, 20, 30 years along the power path, you'll get
Yeah.
better, faster, stronger, but you'll still be a dick.
Yeah.
Nothing changes, no transformation. Then you go
Yeah.
40 years, 50 years, and that better, faster, stronger has a diminishing return and you get worse, slower, and weaker. So it's
Yeah.
like, boom, and you're still a dick. I mean, it's very oversimplification, but there's
Yeah.
no real personal transformation.
It's
However, if you choose it as a higher path of practice, which I'll get into in just a second, and you take not the power path, but the transformational path,
yeah.
which is also powerful, you do get better, faster, stronger, but as you get older, which means you get slower and weaker and maybe not as sharp, you keep growing. You keep growing.
Yes.
You keep going through transformation because what's being transformed is not the physical.
Yeah.
It's not the technical. It's you could say it's the mental or the emotional, I suppose you could say,
Yeah.
psychological, philosophical, but the spiritual. And that's what a higher path is. And a higher path of practice is something, what makes it higher? It's higher than and this probably goes back to your question. A higher path is something that is higher than our low level base instincts, our kind of
Mm.
animal instincts,
Yes.
our fears and desires. Every step on the path, a higher path of practice is a step of awareness. And sooner or later, probably sooner, we're going to be met with our own personal limitations.
Yeah.
So the question is, are we going to contract around those personal limitations and try to be better, faster, stronger? Or are we going to open up to those personal limitations and allow awareness to help us overcome and
Yeah.
transform those personal limitations? And what makes the difference? Sometimes it's just karma. Some people have it, some people
Yeah.
don't. Other times or more often than not, it's the context. Like O
Yeah.
Sensei's teacher, you probably know the story, Sokaku Takeda. He's
Yeah.
one of
He
the
was a nasty dude.
He was a nasty. He was one of the top martial artists in Japan. He would kill people. He would walk through the rough parts of Tokyo where the muggers would come out just so he could kill them.
Yep.
Just he had an excuse. He knew he was going to kill them, and they would come out to
Yeah.
mug him, and he would kill them. So he was a bad dude. And then, I'm not sure about his students if they became whatever. But how did O-sensei not be influenced by that? He had his own spiritual thing going, so he wasn't
Yeah.
influenced. But other people, like let's be simplistic, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, not Obi-Wan, Anakin, can be
Yeah.
hanging out with somebody like Obi-Wan Kenobi and
Yeah.
still turn into Darth Vader. They get a little
Yes.
influence from the wrong guy at the wrong time and at the right time, and then they take a different path. So
Yeah,
sometimes it's
totally.
karmic, sometimes it's the culture that you're training in.
Well, it's like even that, like, it's funny, like, take the Star Wars analogy this far, but like even Anakin's fate, right, was intertwined with that of Palpatine. So
Right.
it's still karma. Like you have this influence. It's your karma to kind of be around that, and then he has this karmic propensity, this weakness in him that's this fear of loss, and then Palpatine finds that, manipulates it, and turns him to the dark side. It,
Yeah, if I remember the movie, he even kind of what do you say, planted it in him with his mother.
yes,
Whatever. Yeah, whatever. That's the
yeah,
Star Wars story. But my point is that so you're a teacher, right? How long are you teaching?
yep. I've been teaching about 10 years.
Great. So you know as well as I do that teaching has a huge responsibility. It's a huge
Yes.
responsibility. It's not just to help people get better faster, right? Not just to help them learn how to defend themselves, build their confidence. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
basic stuff. But we're in a way where we're kind of accompanying people on their karmic transformation.
Yeah.
So,
No,
and
yeah,
that's
like
that's
holding that
serious
space for
stuff.
them.
That's serious stuff, yeah. And
Yeah.
we can, you could like Palpatine, you could just plant some nasty seeds that's going to, take them down to a dead end. And this might be a good place to change it, to shift to my meditation practice, because my meditation teacher, he used to always say to me, I was in Japan doing Aikido for 8 years, and I was attracted to Aikido. I started Aikido when I was 22. And I was attracted. I did Taekwondo and karate. I did some judo as a kid. I did Iaido and
Hmm.
Kendo. Loved them all. Loved all these martial Kung Fu. I also did Kung Fu. Loved them all. Bruce Lee was a big influence. Probably the seed that Bruce Lee planted was already kind of a martial, spiritual warrior thing.
Yeah.
But the reason I was drawn to Aikido is because there's a spiritual warrior here. There's a spiritual component here that just attracted me. So I started Aikido at 22 and was training like hell. And then at 20, I went to Japan at 25, came back. I went for a couple of months, came back. I knew, and then a year later, I was back in Japan. I ended up living there for 8 years and was at this really kind of famous dojo in the countryside and doing my thing. It was my path. And I was being strongly influenced by the context and the culture in Japan's beautiful culture and my teacher, of course. But after a certain point, I was realizing, wait a second, I don't feel personally like I'm getting any closer to this spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
And nobody around me was either.
Yeah.
There's not a judgment of the people around me. Maybe I had some judgment back then, but it's really not a judgment. It's just
It's like there was something missing from the formula.
for me. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
for 90% of the people, there wasn't.
Yeah.
But then again, I was training full time all day, not all day, every day for, the whole 8 years.
Yeah.
And so it accelerated me to reach the glass ceiling. And
Yes.
then I kept hitting the glass ceiling. I realized I was looking for more, and that's why I went. Well, it was time for me to, after 8 years, I was kind of done in Japan, and I moved on. I was going to move back to the States, but I decided to go to Burma to do some meditation.
Ah,
And my meditation teacher, I met him. There's a whole story there I won't go into because it's a pretty wild story. But the first thing he said to me, one of the first teachings he gave to me was that 100% of the suffering in the world. Now he's a Buddhist meditation teacher, so this is how suffering's a big deal there. Or they talk,
yeah.
they get right to the point. They get right to what's
Yes.
relevant in life. He said 100% of suffering in the world has its root cause in the mind,
Yes.
and that your practice, mindfulness meditation practice, is to purify the mind.
Yes.
Period. You got to have a good ethical foundation, but then you're going to go in and you're going to develop your energetic effort, your mindfulness, and your concentration for the purpose of purifying the mind. And you're going to see how the mind, and that's when I first really understood what a path of transformation. I really began to understand what a transformational path is. And I
Yeah.
had my struggles. I had lots of dead ends. I would get caught in these kind of hindrances and, waste a
Hmm.
lot of time. I was just meditating. I didn't, or often a lot of time I was just sitting there thinking, to be honest. And I'd
Yeah,
go and do the report. And the teachers knew when I was stuck. They knew when I was making progress. They knew when I was kind of hitting a plateau or
that.
something. And often, well, I'll just finish with this one thing,
Yeah,
because
yeah. Go ahead.
often they would say to me, they'd say, look, right path, right destination,
Yeah.
wrong path, wrong destination.
Yes.
And it took me a while to sink in. You know how it is with the teacher. Yeah, you hear it, you hear it, you hear it, and then one day the coin drops, and it's like, yeah, fuck, I realized, and a lot of the stuff that I was learning in Aikido, the way that I was applying my mind, that I'd kind of just adopted myself, in the gaps
Mhm.
there. It was the wrong path. It was,
Yeah.
and then I started to realize, what they were talking about, and it's so important, So yeah, that's
So
it.
yeah, like I think that this is really important in both. It's interesting. I see these really deep parallels between the like sort of like eightfold path type advice,
Hmm.
and what we need to do to become skilled in martial arts. There's like some really deep parallels there, and what you said about
It's amazing.
right path, right destination. It's like
Yeah,
we want to cultivate certain things in the mind or in the body, right? And
yeah,
the way so many people go about this, especially Westerners with a Western mindset, is like
yeah,
we think about what we want and we focus on what we want rather than continuously applying the factors that will cause it to develop, right? So you have to just keep applying these particular factors, and then the right destination, you'll get there, right? But you have to be
yeah.
very diligent about just continuously applying these certain
Well,
things.
I would say there's three, actually there's five things, but there's the keeping applying, super important. Get into the dojo as much as
Yeah,
possible, but then you need that guidance. You've got to
yes,
have, even if it's a little bit from time to time, you need a teacher or somebody that's just a little bit or a lot further along the path than we are.
yeah.
Step in and say, hey,
No, you need that
try
course
this.
correction,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah,
you're a
absolutely.
little bit off in the beginning, and then you end up a lot off further down the road.
Again, this is if the ego is not being purified, you'll be convinced that that's the way.
Yes,
And you'll compare it to others and you'll try to prove yourself and you'll get into all this kind of,
yeah,
really a waste of time. I mean, it's just ego stuff. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Well, it's also right. You say waste time. It's also like running around in circles. It's
It's the
samsara,
wrong path. It's a
right?
wrong path means it's a dead end.
Yeah,
It's a dead end. You'll get to the end of that, maybe the end of your life, and you're like, oh, fuck, what was that?
totally.
Whereas, all of these arts, in all of these paths, again, this comes from Buddhism. Um, they're kind of a metaphor for what we're doing is a boat.
Yeah,
We need that boat to cross the river, and we use that boat to cross the river. And the more, what do you say? The more ship shape the boat is, the better it crosses. So choose your
yeah.
art good. The better captain on that boat is gonna, so choose your teachers good. The better crew, so choose your crew good. But ultimately, it's our boat. We have to get across. And the better the method or the practice to get across is also, so choose good. But once you get across,
Don't be
you don't
attached to the boat.
you don't need it. Well, I wouldn't say no, you don't need the boat anymore. You might
Yeah,
just go on and live the rest of your life and, be happy.
yeah,
Or you might decide to turn around, and help other people across the river.
yeah. To become
Use the boat,
very
use
people.
yeah, exactly. Use the
Yeah,
boat to in one form or another. It could be teaching the martial arts, or it could be doing piecework or raising kids or whatever it is. Hang on just a second, I gotta plug this in.
no problem.
One of my lights went out. How's
Yeah,
this?
there was
That's
something that you said earlier about development and how we are able to develop that I thought was really important, and then it's also kind of touches on why the meditation practice is so valuable and so important.
mhm.
um as we're developing and we encounter like I think you said our personal fixations, our personal hangups, right? That
We
we
all have
need.
them.
we
which
need
are shortcomings.
awareness,
Yeah.
right? We need more awareness to pierce through these,
Well,
right?
often we need the reflection so we can have the awareness. We need the teacher that's gonna, with sweetness or with bitter in a bitter way or in a sweet way is going to show it to us, and then we have the awareness.
Yes. And I think this is where having a meditation teacher, having meditation practice, it gives you more juice, so to speak. You have this extra awareness that you can apply to getting through these personal hangups. Otherwise, it's so easy to clench down around them and kind of like contract. Yeah, I think that's the word you use.
Yeah, I mean, meditation goes straight to the point.
Yeah.
It takes us right to what we're dealing with. In a way, with martial arts, there's so much to learn. Yeah, you could
Yes.
spend your whole life, especially if you do cross training.
Yeah.
You could spend your whole life training one. You could spend your whole life cross training a few. You could spend your whole life trying to integrate. We're talking about years and years of practice, and in that endeavor, you will be developing the mind, of course.
Yes.
Or you could just sit down and start to develop the mind.
Yeah.
Or you can do both, like I did, I
Yeah,
guess,
I
like
think
you
it's
did.
interesting, like how doing both works, and this is something that I think it's gonna be different for everybody. But there's
Hmm.
kind of like I kind of have a couple minds about it in the sense that like something like what you did might be very effective in the sense of you spent a big block of time training Aikido very intensely, and then
You
after
did your
that,
homework. Yeah,
it seems
yeah,
you spent a block of time training mindfulness, and I think that
that's right.
this approach can really work where it's
If you have, wait, you got to have the conditions to do that.
yes,
If you got family
absolutely,
and a career, forget it. You're not going to be able to do that.
yes. But I
But
also think
yeah, I
there's
interrupted you. Sorry. Yeah.
no, no, it's okay. I think that there's also other ways to sort of skin the cat in the sense of we can take principles from mindfulness, principles from meditation. It seems like I'm guessing since you were in Burma, you were studying Theravada tradition.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, so my background in Buddhism, I mostly studied Theravada and then Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhism. So I
What
kind
kind
of,
of what did you study Theravada meditation?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Which one?
The mixed shamatha and vipassana, not the pure vipassana. So
Which
mainly,
school? Which school?
uh, it was
Probably Goenka.
no, 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 no. It wasn't. I don't know particularly which
Okay.
like what school it was. We spent a
Doesn't matter.
lot of time focusing on four immeasurables.
Okay.
That was the main thing
Nice.
that we did
That's a
was
great practice. That's a
four
great
measurables,
practice.
shamatha. But it wasn't the like Goenka is mostly vipassana. He tends not to.
No, they do samatha for a few days. Like on their 10-day retreats, the first 3 days is
Yeah,
samatha, and then they shift to vipassana. It is a vipassana tradition though, yeah. But they use
like
some samatha. In the Burmese tradition that I studied with, which is called Mahasi, it's straight vipassana. You only do
yes.
samatha when you get to the advanced stages, you do samatha, but not before that.
Yeah, the one where I studied, he was Chinese. It was at a Chinese monastery, but I'm pretty sure that he trained in Burma, honestly, or
Yeah, there's a lot
Malaysia.
of
But he
there's a lot of Burmese meditation there's a connection between Malaysia as well.
he was like huge on shamatha. Like it was like
Hmm.
you're gonna get to the jhana, and then we'll do vipassana. Like
It accelerates your vipassana.
yeah, yeah.
But getting the jhana, you
And
can
you also
spend
get stuck on it. I personally have had this problem because I was able to achieve some of the lower jhana states, and it's just
mm.
so pleasant that I sit down to meditate, and I'm like, I'm gonna do that today. It's so nice.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, I mean, if there's a tendency to get stuck, you're going to get stuck on anything.
Yes.
So it's possible that you just got stuck on that thing, and maybe it just had to do with the method you were working. But it's probably more likely it was a tendency in the mind.
Yeah.
If you were doing Vipassana, the same thing would happen in Vipassana. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I hear this a lot, but we all, like you said before, we all bring our tendencies
Yes.
to the
Absolutely.
practice, and it's not necessarily the practice that we get stuck in, but it's
Yeah.
our tendencies that get us
I
stuck.
think that's actually a really wonderful point, and it carries for both meditation and martial arts. Is people spend a lot of time like criticizing pedagogies and being like, oh, well, like the methods like this and the methods like that, and it's like there's probably nothing wrong with the pedagogy. Like it's probably you. Like, you probably just need to do the work, and it'll probably have the intended effect if you follow it
Well,
well.
yeah, and from a more mature perspective, we need to get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
You know,
100%.
to purify the mind, the shit has to come to the surface
Yes.
and float around in being stuck or being an asshole or being depressed, whatever tendencies we're bringing,
Yeah.
impurities that we have in our mind from this lifetime or past, however you want to look at it,
Yep.
they have to be purified. And the only way for them to be purified is to be brought up. And that's where, unlike samatha, mindfulness is the
Yeah.
practice that purifies the mind.
Yes.
Samatha is the practice that supports us in that
Yeah.
purification. But
Because
mindfulness
it
is
only
the
leads to the
only
suppression.
thing. Samatha well, the thing about samatha, it, um,
It sort of dampens these negative factors, but it doesn't uproot them completely the way Vipassana can.
it doesn't uproot them at all. It cools them
Yeah.
down, but it doesn't
Yes.
uproot them at all.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
in samatha, you were talking about the jhanas. Jhanas, for those who are listening or watching, they're states of absorption. You
Yeah.
absorb into, and there's four formless and four form and four formless, and each one of them is a deeper state, and it's kind of like getting into a trance, but there's still awareness there. You're not lost, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like going in. And the reason I say it's getting into a trance because it goes deeper than the sense doors.
Yes.
So the deeper you go, the less the hearing, the feeling, the seeing, the tasting, the touching, and the thinking,
Yes.
they get subdued. And because the mind is subdued and the mind is, your concentration is one pointed, nothing's coming up. The mind, there's
Yeah.
no noise in the mind. So you can't work with it. And now just
Yes.
use a martial metaphor, like my meditation teacher was a man named Sayadaw U Pandita. And he was probably the greatest spiritual warrior I ever met, but he was just a monk since he was 6 years old. But he used to use this metaphor between the difference between samatha practice, which is concentration-based meditation, versus vipassana practice, which is mindfulness-based meditation. That samatha practice is like going into a battle with a big shield. You're
Yeah.
protected. All the
Yes.
the slings and arrows and cuts and strikes. You're just boom. You're protected. You're
Yep.
behind there, and you don't feel any of it. Vipassana, on the other hand, is like going into a battle with a sword, where you cut through delusion, you cut through greed, you cut through hatred, you cut through delusion, but you're wide open. So you
Yeah.
take the hits, and it's
Yes.
it's so
Yes.
it's bloody. Well,
Yeah.
bloody is maybe not the right metaphor here, right? It's painful. There's
Yeah.
suffering. You got the physical pains and suffering, you got the emotional pains and suffering, you got the mental pains and suffering. And again, like we were saying before, those things have to come up for
Yes.
us to purify them. They're not bugs in the practice, they are features in the practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
just think when like a lot of stress or anxiety or pain or sorrow or regrets are coming up in the mind, you want to scream like hell or just go watch Netflix or whatever, go to the corner and masturbate, anything to not deal with that stuff. But no, in
Yes.
meditation, you sit in the center of the storm, and this is where the martial metaphor is right there. You sit with it without flinching if you can. That's the practice.
Yeah.
Without the egoic moves when things are coming up like that is to try to control
Yeah.
these let's say unwholesome mental thoughts, or to indulge these unwholesome mental thoughts, or to deny these unwholesome mental thoughts. So let's say
It reacts. The ego reacts.
these are the three types of reactions.
It's basically
It,
fight, flight, or
flight,
freeze.
freeze, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the fight would be the controlling it, the or resisting it. The flight would be maybe it's the same as indulging it. I'm not so sure. But then the freeze is the denying it. You kind of
Yes.
bury your head in the sand. And in Vipassana meditation, mindfulness meditation, you try to sit there with mirror mind, which is really it's a Zen term, not a Vipassana term. But you just be with whatever's arising. And when your concentration, and this is where concentration comes in, when your concentration reaches a sufficient enough strength, you can sit in the face of everything.
Yes.
without withering or shaking. You know, that's kind of
Yes.
Fudo Shin from Zen. It means the
Yeah. The
unshakable
immovable
Fudo, you
one.
know. That's right. Yeah, the immovable mind. It doesn't move. And then all that stuff, it comes up, it plays out, it torches you for a while, and it diminishes and then disappears, goes right
Yes.
back to where it came from, nowhere.
Yes.
That's the process of purification. You sit in the
Yes.
heat, you sit in the heat, whether even desire, by the way, it doesn't have to be an unpleasant experience. It could be a pleasant experience. But you
Yeah.
sit in the heat without reacting, without fight, flight, freeze, without indulging, without resisting, without denying. You sit in the heat and let it burn out. And every time it burns away, your karma is getting burned off. Your karma is getting burned off.
Yeah.
And when you reach attainments, when you gain the path, when you reach the end of the path, certain things are purified from the mind for once and forever, for always. And there's some gradual steps along there, but that's when the mind really starts to get purified. So fear gets purified, and doubts get purified, and wrong views get purified, and greed and hatred get diminished quite a bit along the
Yeah.
way at a much higher level of awakening, which is, I can only say, it's above my pay grade. Apparently, those two get uprooted completely forever and always.
Yeah.
And that's what probably you and I would consider some type of level of like a really stable enlightenment or awakening.
Yeah.
Not to be captured by your greed, your hatred, or your fears or desires or delusions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like you brought up earlier, like when you were learning to meditate, when you were there, you said, hey, like I spent so much time just sitting there thinking. And a lot of people who are in the process of learning meditation, or they're on retreat, or they're practicing, they're like, man, like I'm doing such a bad job. But like that is that's part of it,
Well,
that's
yeah, self-judgment is part of the it's part of the
yeah, like
process.
that's
It's not a
that's
bug, it's a feature.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the Tibetan tradition they talk a lot about taking obstacles on the path, right? And
There you go.
kind of
Yeah, that's nice.
seeing these things like it's like, oh, this there's this crisis in the world, right? Or there's this crisis in my life and it's making me really stressed. Well, it's like, well, this is the perfect time to purify these reactions that I'm having to these things. So it kind of flips your perspective from being, hey, this is bad and I hate this, to, oh, this is actually a chance to work on this. And it's very interesting too, because when I'm working with high level competitors and helping them to deal with certain emotions that they have and work on their mind, one of the things that's really powerful is there's this story about an Olympic shooter who he flew out somewhere and they have to pack the guns a certain way so they can get them in, and he gets there and his gun isn't there, and they're very intimate with their guns in the sense that
We guess
that
so,
one
yeah.
that's your gun, how to shoot
Oh,
this
we guess so,
gun,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So he looks at his friend and he's like, you know what? He's like, I'm the only guy here who has the chance to win a gold medal with a gun he's never shot before. And it's like the perfect, like, you have this obstacle, you wake up the morning of the competition and you're vomiting and you're like, you know what? Like, I'm the only guy who has the chance to win this competition
There you
who
go.
was
There
throwing
you
up
go.
this morning.
Yeah, and like we said before, they're not the bugs, they're the features. They're not arising in spite of the practice, they're arising because of the practice. And in
Yes.
that sense, they are the way, or this is the way,
Yes.
like
Yeah,
Star Wars
absolutely.
metaphor. But that's it. And it kind of sucks because these things that come up for us, my God, we'd rather do anything than face this shit. Really.
Yeah.
And yet, like again, higher path of practice, we meet our shortcomings. You know that if you're really gonna, and you and I are martial artists, right? We've invested in our life in this path for whatever, better or worse. You know that when you're confronted with things, if you back down, you're failing the path in that moment. You can't, first, your teacher could probably see it, but let's say the teacher's not there. You can't lie at a certain point, you just can't lie to yourself. You can
Yes.
back off, you can relax, you can take a day off, you can work around, whatever. But you gotta stay with it. You've got to stay
Yeah.
with it. And
Yeah.
and now the tricky thing is not to be just dig in a stubborn way, because that's
Yes.
also problematic.
It's also another way of making it egoic is to be like, I'm gonna overpower these hangups, I'm gonna crush them. So you
Well,
have to
we're
kind of
again,
like, and
right.
this is where
So,
I think like the Aikido koan that you talk about kind of comes in, is like, because it's a little bit paradoxical, right? Like we don't want to be aggressive, and we don't want to be passive, and we don't want to be passive aggressive.
well, wait, hang on a second. Now, there might be moments where we do want to be aggressive. There might be
Yeah.
moments where we do want to be passive. Who knows? There might be a moment where, with full consciousness, we want to be passive aggressive. I don't know. But as unconscious reactions, it's
Yes.
not that we don't want to be that way. We need to be aware that we are that way.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to, we don't want to judge our own tendencies.
Then we'll start to deny them, and we won't
It's
see it when
it
it
is
happens.
exactly. Then it's the same thing. We're having a war with ourselves. So we face it, we accept it, and it's yeah, and that's why the Aikido koan, a koan is a practice that is meant. They're called Zen riddles. I'm just saying this for your
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah.
I'm sure you
Absolutely.
understand what they're called Zen riddles, and they're basically a riddle or a question or a phrase that you're supposed to answer that can't be answered cognitively, intellectually, rationally. So any cognitive, intellectual, or rational answer you give, the teacher, slaps you with the Zen stick. Not really, but he says, no, go back and work on it. So you go back and sit and meditate. So basically, you end up exhausting the mind. And only when the mind is exhausted, only when the cognitive, the rational, and the mental tendencies are negated, the self lets go,
Yeah.
then something can arise. And whatever's arising is usually something like the answer. Again, I'm not a Zen Buddhist. I never did formal Zen training. But in Aikido, we know this that being a a positive sum martial art, not a zero sum
Yes.
martial art where there's a
It's so
winner
funny
and
that
a
you
loser.
have this concept, because it's something that many, like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I had this big thing where I remember just putting a block of text on Instagram and being like, martial arts is not a zero sum game, and like people don't realize, we think, because we think of winning and losing and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not zero sum.
People don't
Everyone has
realize
something
it
to gain.
because they're not interested. I mean, being positive somehow, I could go into this a lot because right now we're in a war, and my whole thing was always dialogue and facing wicked problems, and having conversations around them. And basically for the last 2 years, all that's been shut down, about the
Yeah.
war with Israel, Palestine, pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, Hamas, and now Hezbollah, and all that stuff. So it's
And
like, okay,
oftentimes we only hear zero sum solutions and zero
well,
sum
that's what I'm saying.
opinions.
Right now, the we're in a zero sum eclipse in a way. There's
Yes.
very little opportunity for positive sum. Okay, fine. So I'm going to go into the wilderness for a little while and work on positive sum myself.
Yeah.
But basically, positive sum means you fully enter into a conflict, a friction. Let's just say basic conflict, when one perspective and another perspective try to occupy the same place at the same time, and they can't. So they create a
Yes.
friction, they create a tension there. And that's basically a simplistic way to say a conflict. Everything inside of us, all the bells and whistles are going off to fight, flight, freeze, especially if it's
Oh,
physical or
yeah.
it gets to be confrontational, everything inside of us. And usually whatever our motivations are, we're not so clear. Now, sometimes we have no choice but to just react or respond to what's going on in the moment. If you have kids, I think you said you had a baby there,
Yes.
right? Yeah, good.
Yep.
If our kids are in there, I don't know, fuck it, I don't care. Zero
Yeah.
schmiro, I'm just, whatever.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
kids protect, that's it, done. But if I have the convenience, the privilege of being able to stop and center myself and ground myself, connect with the situation, check my own reactivity, because there's a lot there in an intense situation, be able to take a breath, and my awareness can contain everything that's going off, all the bells and whistles that are going off in me, can contain the nature of the conflict, and can actually also connect with the other in a way where I intuitively start to get what's going on in them. That, yeah, they're stressed, they're angry, they're this, they're that. I can just see it all, without. Then you start to create a zero sum context. You start. The
Yeah.
reason I say you start because it takes two to tango.
Yes.
But when we're centered, calm, connected, and meeting the other person, it is, in a way, it's an implicit invitation for them to center and meet
Yeah.
us,
Yeah, totally.
you know? And
I mean,
and
you can see
that's
that with
when
like animals.
what's that?
You're interacting with a dog or a cat. If you
Oh, totally, yeah. Or yeah, or horse.
like
Apparently, I never
there's
trained horses,
something
but yeah.
deep in physiology that reacts.
It's our animal instinct, it's there. And but we have a higher instinct. We have higher intelligence. And when you and I can interface with the higher intelligence, including all that lower chakra shit. It's
Yeah,
there. But no, wait a second. Hang on a second. We're also committed to something bigger here. It's like, let's get into it. But there's something bigger. But we still have enough center, enough ground, and enough connection with each other mutually. Then we start to create kind of a system that is center grounded and connected. You
yeah,
and I, you're centered, grounded, connected. I'm centered, grounded, connected. We start to create a system that is
yeah,
centered, grounded, and connected. And in that system is all this crazy stuff that's going off. But that crazy stuff, those emotions, those desires, the fear, whatever, they're informing us where to go. The
yeah.
system is playing off of that stuff. And eventually the system organizes around that in a way that releases all that fixation
And I
and,
think
and
this
move
is
into a higher, that's what moves into a higher sum resolution.
yeah, exactly. And I think this is what um, martial arts and especially Aikido, right, is actually so good for is giving us a little like sandbox to practice this skill in. So you have this awareness, you have this understanding of how to ground yourself, how to center yourself, and then now we start playing around with okay, you over there, you're gonna pretend to attack me, all right, and
Yeah.
I'm going to create a dynamic system where now you start to change your mind about attacking me.
Right.
Like I mean, and this is the beauty of Aikido, right? Is like you manipulate the angles and the person's energy and their movement and their attack in such a way that they actually start to change their mind. And I've seen this myself, not occasionally with Aikido techniques. There's been times where I was in a situation I was able to use some Aikido stuff, but also with like I remember this particular time that uh, somebody had attacked a woman like a little bit up the street from me, and I
Mm.
grabbed him and I put him in a choke, uh, and I'm choking him and I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna kill this guy, I'm gonna kill this guy, and then I caught myself and I said, oh my god, I don't want to kill you, and I let him go, but in that whole like maelstrom of me being in my head, I let him go too soon, and he was still awake.
Okay.
So he stands up and he's about to fight me again. So I grab both of
Uh-huh.
his wrists and I kind of hold them down in a way where he can't
Yeah.
lift his arms at all, and he's sort of struggling to get free. And just that physical gesture, right, of doing that made him change his mind about wanting to
It's
fight.
like, dude, be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, like let's just not do this again, right? Like this
That's
already
awesome.
happened. It didn't go your way. Why don't you just leave? And I think this is where martial arts is so powerful in the sense that you have a chance and an opportunity to play with these energies
Awesome.
and learn how to do this.
So let's go back to the Aikido koan because that's just a perfect example of it. I never really spoke about what it was. It's a koan is basically negating. So you negate the self. No, you negate the mind.
Yeah,
No, you negate this. I'm sorry. So it's a practice that negates the self. And when the self is gone, there's a certain amount of open freedom. So
yeah.
you negate the self and then you negate the negation. That's what they say in Zen. You negate the self,
Hmm.
negate the negation. And then whatever's left is your true nature. The Aikido koan is in the midst of a conflict. You consciously say to yourself, "Okay, I'm not aggressive," because the three tendencies we have in conflicts or in fights is to be aggressive, go in there, try to control it, to be passive, to really kind of run away from it, or to be passive aggressive. These are three movements of power.
Yes.
Aggressive power as aggression is crystal clear. Everybody can see it. Everybody's
Everybody knows
afraid of it.
about that.
Yeah, aggressive power. Passive power is like, okay, they take their power and they run away. Well, you can see that too, but
It's
whatever, they're
also
gone.
victimhood, right? And we've seen this
It
in the
can be. The
West a
shadow
lot
can be victimhood. The
is the
shadow can be
hidden
victimhood.
power in victimhood.
Well, wait a second. So that's the passive aggressive.
Ah, okay.
It's like taking victim as a way to control, it's to gain power. So in other words, it's like imagine there's a pool table
Yeah.
with a bunch of balls, and you're kind of on one corner, and you're able to get your hands underneath the table with nobody seeing and tilt the table so all the balls roll into your pocket.
Yes.
That's what passive aggression is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
gaining power by pretending, hey, look at this guy here, or look at
Yeah.
whatever they're doing, and that's how you get your power.
It's
So
covert. It's covert
it's
aggression.
go yeah, that's one way to say it. You could also say it's bullshit, but it's a thing. When it comes to like rules of the jungle, these are the three things how we survive. They're basic survival
And it's
instincts.
interesting too that they're socially acceptable reactions that people tend to understand if you react in these ways. Nobody's going to be,
That's
oh,
right.
what's
And
up? What's going on there? They're like, no,
what's your what's your ethnic background?
I'm half African American, half Jewish, so I'm a mix.
No way. All right. So there you go. So both African American and Jewish have are close to their emotions.
Yes.
I guess the Ashkenazi Jews are a little bit colder and the Sephardic Jews are a little bit hotter, but we're close to our emotions. So if it's a ethnic or cultural group, if your culture is closer to the emotions, these things will be out loud and proud. If
Yeah.
it's a little bit, if it's more northern kind of northern countries, they like Japan or Europe, they really suppress those emotions.
Yeah.
But it's there for everybody.
Yep.
And the Aikido koan, and if we use those three modes of dealing with conflict, doesn't matter which one, whether we win or they're all zero sum, and they all perpetuate conflict. If you win, imagine you win being aggressive, being passive, or being passive aggressive. It's just going to happen again. It's just going to happen again. It's just going to happen again. A zero sum is the Aikido koan. So what you do is you practice when aggression comes up, you say to yourself, I'm not aggression. I'm not aggressive. And you're not telling yourself, no, be a good boy, don't be aggressive. You're saying, no, you negate the aggression. You get some mindfulness on it. So and you see that the mindfulness is neutral. If passivity comes, you say, I'm not passive. You get some distance on it and you get some awareness around the passivity, and you see that the awareness is neutral. And you say to yourself, I'm not passive aggressive. So if the passive aggressive tendency comes up, you get some awareness on it and you take distance, you see that the awareness or the mindfulness is neutral. I'm not
Yes.
passive, I'm not aggressive, and I'm not passive aggressive. And then you insert the koan or the inquiry, who am I?
Yeah.
And in that space of negation, all your skill is still available. It's right there. In fact, it's even more available. All of your awareness is right there, grounded, centered, connected to the moment, reading the moment, and you are available to ride the appropriate response. I would guess that, like in Aikido, we have jiwasa. Jiwasa, when you do free training, and when you're in this mushin, this space where there's no aggression, no passivity, and no passive aggressiveness, just empty mind, the interaction will tell you what to do. And
Yes.
I'm sure it's the same thing
Yeah.
in jujitsu.
No,
Like when you're
100%.
grappling, it's like you find yourself in a new place, and here we are. And it just
Yes.
it's just doors open that you never would have imagined are opening. That can only happen in the what I'm calling the Aikido koan, or just being present in the moment, or
Yeah.
being trans personal in the sense that all of our stuff is not we're not getting hijacked by these things,
Yes.
but rather they're in us, but we're not in them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. You have to you're reacting is probably the wrong word, but
Response.
you're reading the movements of the opponent, and
That's
in a
right.
lot of ways, something my Tai Chi teacher used to always say was like the opponent is the guide, like they're
Your opponent's the guide. Yeah.
they're
The
giving
the
you
moment is
the
going to tell you what to do.
yep,
The motivation for moving or responding comes from them.
yes,
The energy, it just comes from them, and you're just right there. And it's like another dimension. It's not like that your hands are here and somebody throws a punch and you've got to cover this distance to respond to the punch. It's like you're just right there with them. You're at the point of intention, and when that glimmer, you get that twinkle in their eye, you're just right there with the twinkle, and then whatever comes out, you're an extension of it. So there's no like speed delay or speed game that you're
yeah.
trying to. It's just right there with it.
No, it's interesting too because this type of thing it kind of allows you to transcend timing in a sense because it's weird, like sometimes when I'm training,
Transcend timing.
people
It's
are like,
exactly what
"Man,
it
like, are
is.
you reading my mind?" And it's like, "Well, you're
You're
thinking
camped
really
out.
loud."
They're doing something and you're camped out. You're like,
Yeah,
what the fuck, man?
yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's like it's coming from Kansas, because it's
Yeah, right,
so
exactly.
their intent is so loud and so gross that it's so
For
easy
you,
to hear.
right?
And
Yeah.
one thing
And
I
I'm
try to
sure
teach
there's,
my
yeah,
oh
go
go
ahead,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to
One
say, and I'm sure there's teachers that it's the same with you for them.
yes,
Like,
yeah,
oh, there, there goes James again. Okay, let's do it again.
yes, exactly, yeah. Oh,
I
you
mean,
want to do
that's
that
the
thing
path.
again?
Yeah. There's always people further along the path. And that's
Of
what's beautiful
course.
about it.
No, one of my teachers, I would always put my hand on this particular spot on his hip, and he would always armbar me right as I would do it. And he's like, there you go, putting your
Thank
hand
you.
there again. He's like, why do you want to do that? He's like, I've told you not to do that. I've only done it to you 7 times.
Yeah.
No, it's
I
so
think I
true.
interrupted. You were going to say something and I kind of jumped in
Uh,
there.
yeah, I just think that one thing I try to teach my students is not to think about what you're doing. I said, nobody can read your mind or know what you're going to do if you don't know what you're going to do. The only reason I
Nice.
know what you're going to do is because you're thinking about it, and it comes out. So it's like, if you want to stop someone from reading your mind, don't think. Don't think about what you're going to do. Don't have a plan, right? And
Right.
then you learn to actually be in the moment and be present, because you're not imposing this idea on it.
Well, it's like the Tengu, the Tory, the Tengu. And listen, James, I'm just looking at the clock now. So it's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
10, and we almost always get alarms. So I'm just sitting here half expecting to get a nasty sound from my phone. But maybe we can finish off. Do you know the story of the Tengu? You know what the Tengu are?
No, no, share it.
All right. I mean, I've told these on a few podcasts. You might have heard me. I've also got a little thing written about it on my blog. But the Tengu are these mystical,
The
or not
winged,
mystical, yeah, mythical Japanese demons, or demons from Japanese mythology, samurai demons or warrior
who
demons.
often oddly show up as martial arts teachers and scrolls. Like
Well,
I've
well,
read a
there you
lot of
go.
martial arts were like founded by
So
Tengu.
that's
I'm
the
like, this is
point.
interesting.
So when a samurai would basically master in his school, he had to go off. He had to leave. He had to become Mushashugo. He had to do a steward training without a master, and he would go from dojo to dojo. And if he beat them, he'd go to the next dojo. If they beat him, he would stay and learn until he perfected that, and he'd move on. At a certain point, when there's nothing else he can do on the martial, physical, technical realm, he has to, if he really wants to become master, he has to go seek out the Tengu. But the Tengu is going to teach him, and they teach him esoteric. So he would so the sama, he or she, I should say, would leave the world in a way. They would go seek out the Tengu, who live up in the mountains, off the beaten path, deep into the woods, deep into the shadows, and they would go seeking out the Tengu to ask to be taught by the Tengu. And
Hmm.
they couldn't find the Tengu. They could never find them. So they had to go in days and weeks, and they exhaust themselves, no food, no whatever, no water, until they would way up in the mountains alone by themselves, they would collapse. And only then the Tengu, several of the Tengu, would descend from the treetops out of the shadows, and they would surround the samurai, and they pull out their swords, hold it above their head. He's collapsed on the ground, or she. And then the Dai Tengu. So the Tengu they're half human, half crow. So they have
Yeah.
wings. That's the way they would descend from the trees. They have talons for feet, and they have human hands and a sword, and then they have a crow face. And the Dai Tengu, the same, except he doesn't have a crow face. He has this long phallic nose, kind of red face,
Yeah,
and has
yeah,
a
yeah.
phallic nose. So the Dai Tengu would descend down in front of the samurai, and he would reach into his, and they're all surrounding him with their swords high. He would reach into his pocket, and he would pull out a mirror. And a mirror it's in Shinto. On every Shinto shrine, there's a mirror.
Totally
And
mirror.
the mirror reflects your true nature. It reflects the entirety of your karma and the entirety of your wisdom. Wisdom being your awakened mind, awareness, mindfulness, purity, and karma being all the shit that we have to still work out in our minds. When the samurai would look into that mirror, if they would tremble or quiver or recoil in the face of that reflection, the Tengu would cut them to pieces, dead. But if they could stay grounded, centered, connected, and aware in the face of all the shit and all the purity that's being confronted that they're being confronted with in the mirror, the Tengu would take their swords, they'd put it back in the sheath, They would kneel down, bow down, and they would serve. They would start, then they would teach the samurai.
Huh.
And that's the whole conversation that you and I've been having.
Yeah.
It's like that there's the power path where we just try to overcome it and we stay the same person the whole way, or we're able to stay and be confronted with the fears and desires of the self that come up
Yeah. And I think that's what the
every
Tengu
other step of the
represent in
path.
this story, right? Is that lower element of ourself in a way.
Well, yeah, and it's when we go from physical training to esoteric training,
Yes.
or you could say from martial training to spiritual training. It's
Yeah.
when the martial art gets elevated. And you'll notice that the martial arts gets elevated when the martial side is exhausted.
Yes. Yeah, you have to
It's-
hit that
it-
glass ceiling.
yeah, it doesn't really have to be exhausted, but there's a certain amount you got to do.
You got to get to a
You
certain level.
you could just do meditation and still become an amazing, spiritual
Yes.
warrior. Don't get me
Yep.
wrong. But it's, you've got to in for a penny, in for a pound type of thing.
Yeah.
And then, when you reach, you realize that, hang on a second, there's more and I'm not finding it here. Doesn't mean you have to leave the martial arts or your school or your teacher. You
No.
might, but doesn't mean you have to. It just means you need to look at things in a different way.
Yeah, you have to
And at
find
that
that
point,
new perspective.
having a guide or a practice can be or a tradition can be very beneficial.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And also very, very appreciative for you, of you for doing this. This was a fantastic conversation. I think I learned a lot. I think the viewers will really have a lot to take from this. So I really appreciate it.
Well, here's the last thing I'll say about it, and it has to do with the Tengu. There's this one Japanese Zen master martial artist. What was his name? Oh God, I'm gonna have to send it to you afterwards, and you can write it in the
In the show
YouTube.
notes.
Yeah, in the show notes. Isai something. Isai. Anyways, I'll send you his name.
Yeah.
But he had done Tengu training. He came out as an awakened Zen master and a martial artist. And he had a famous quote. He says that the measure of a true master is according to this, that he or she can take from the dregs of the ancients and extract clear liquid.
Mm.
So we take the technical cultural tradition that has been handed to us as dregs. It's not it was alive in our teacher, but we're taking it on as dregs,
Yeah.
dead, leftover, copied stuff. It's our
Yes.
job to extract clear liquid from that. And the clear liquid that we express through our martial, let's say, maturity, becomes the way, becomes the new way. And it might be exactly how your teacher did it. It might be your whole new expression of the art. Everybody's different.
Yeah. But you're able to take this essence from it that's relevant and clear.
Yeah. And it's exactly what Bruce Lee was talking about,
Yeah.
to go back to kind
Yeah.
of come full circle with the man who started it all for many of us.
Yeah, totally.
James, it's been awesome. I enjoyed the conversation. Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's definitely. I'd love to come back and do another episode with you. It was great.
Yeah, we were going to talk. Also, I told you, hey, let's let the war be done, and then I'll have a little bit more space. But I thought, what a best time to talk about this stuff than in the middle of, bombs and shit falling from the sky and
Yeah, I think
horrible.
it's also, an opportunity. One thing that's come up quite a few times on the podcast is like the unique dedication that it takes to walk this kind of a path. And sometimes these crises, these things that happen, they actually become things to come on the path with you. And this is something that I think if people really want to develop, martially and spiritually, that they have to become more comfortable with.
Well, we only get a full measure of ourselves in these moments.
Yeah, exactly.
We only get a full measure of our what we've developed in our practice in these moments. We take it from the samurai who could not go to war for 300 years. We take it into battle, or when we take it out of the kata training into the octagon or whatever, into the ring, or when we take it from our basically theoretical or formal practice into real life.
Yeah,
And
that's when you
boom,
get to see.
that's when you get to see.
Well, thank you so much. This was great.
Enjoyed it, James.
And I
And
guess we were
let's
very lucky not to have any no alerts for the time.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, man. Wishing you all the best. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, ciao, ciao.